Urgent. Japan is preparing for war with Russia. Shocking. Putin's aide let slip a secret. He accused Japan of preparing new territorial claims. The secret plan has been revealed. The Kuril Islands are just a small part. They want to take everything. These details will surprise you. Watch.
Russia is preparing for yet another war. The dispute over the Kuril Islands is gaining momentum.
And here the overall task is quite complicated indeed.
Moscow has stated that Japan is planning to put forward new territorial claims against Russia. According to Putin's aide Nikolai Patrushev, this poses a direct threat to the national security of the Russian Federation. From his point of view, Tokyo's policy, which seeks the return of the islands, is driven by commercial interests.
What the Japanese need today is not justice regarding the so-called northern territories, but resources, both mineral and biological. The sea depths around the Kuril Islands have unique hydrography.
Russia is a vassal of China, while China and Japan are strategic adversaries. Therefore, any outburst from the likes of Patrushev, Putin, or anyone else from the Russian ruling elite is in a way a gesture and a message from Moscow to its senior partner, Beijing. So it's probably not worth being surprised by this statement. But overall, it's also important to understand that Russia is aggressively disposed toward any representative of the Western Bloc.
Patrushev also emphasized that Russia will not sit idly by in the face of Tokyo's militarization policy and will strengthen its defensive capabilities in the Far East.
Russia always uses the claim that someone allegedly wants to attack it as a pretext for aggression. This has always been the case, without exception. And the most recent wars that Russia started also began in roughly the same way. In other words, Russia never attacks first. This is the foundation of their ideology. It always claims to be repelling someone else's attacks. Therefore, from the perspective of Russian logic and Russian diplomacy, accusing someone of allegedly wanting to attack Russia is always the crucial first step toward launching aggression against someone.
Above all, it's the desire to appear a certain way, rather than to actually be that way. At the moment, Russia does not have enough resources to wage a full-scale war with Ukraine, prepare for a potential invasion of the Baltic states, and at the same time build up military resources in the Far East. Rather, it's more of a declaration of intent and, once again, a message to China that, in the context of confrontation with Chinese adversaries, Russia is ready to be a major ally and, well, a junior partner in any initiative coming from Beijing.
And once again, the aide to the Russian dictator has stated that Russia rightfully owns the islands. And there's nothing to discuss here.
Their legal status is currently disputed since Japan considers them its own territory, while Russia controls these territories, but Japan does not legally recognize this.
The point is that for more than 70 years, the countries have been unable to sign a peace treaty because of the territorial dispute over the Kuril Islands. Tokyo names the return of the islands as the main condition for signing the treaty. But the Kremlin believes that the southern Kurils became part of the USSR as a result of World War II, and their sovereignty is beyond question.
The corresponding Kuril Islands, including some islands that Japan refers to as the Northern Territories and believes are not directly related to the Kuril Islands themselves. They were occupied by the Soviet Union, but this was never legally finalized in the form of a specific treaty. And now the prospects for this treaty are looking more and more doubtful. That is, even back in Yeltsin's time, there was a draft of a corresponding treaty that would have settled all issues, particularly the territorial ones. There was an interesting proposal in which Russia would return 2 small islands to Japan. In exchange, Japan would recognize Russia's control over the 2 remaining, slightly larger islands. And in this way, a kind of diplomatic solution would be found. But at that time, it all fell through.
The Russian dictator and the former Prime Minister of Japan met 25 times to try to reach an agreement on the islands, but without success. And after the constitution was amended, the transfer of any part of Russian territory was made illegal.
In Russia, the law and the constitution are not considered absolutely unbreakable norms. Putin himself was only supposed to serve 2 terms according to the constitution, but he is still in power. And the Russian constitution has been changed so many times that I think the essence of the problem isn't really about the constitution, but rather about Putin's personal, let's say, desire to demonstrate his imperial grandeur. But Putin is not eternal, and neither is Russian imperialism.
In March 2023, Russia broke off peace treaty negotiations with Japan, which had supported Western sanctions after the invasion of Ukraine.
At this very moment, Ukraine has done something incredible. They have unleashed mega weapons on the battlefield. A true revolution in warfare. An armada of drones will destroy everything. Ukraine has become the first country in the world to use artificial intelligence to coordinate UAVs. How will this change the course of the war? Watch!
Swarms of AI-powered drones have already entered the battlefield. At this new frontier of warfare, Ukraine is using technology that allows groups of drones to communicate and make decisions independently of their operator.
According to Western journalists, Ukraine is using artificial intelligence in military operations so that groups of drones can coordinate their actions to attack well-defended Russian positions. Military experts claim that operations involving large and small groups of drones represent a new stage in the war. Such innovations make it possible to deploy dozens or even thousands of drones simultaneously to overcome any air defense systems and target defenses, whether it's a city or a specific military facility.
If it becomes possible to scale up production and so-called swarm attacks are carried out, meaning when a swarm is flying, it's clear that you might shoot down part of the swarm, but you can't shoot down 100 drones flying at the same time. Well, in that case, of course, there will be major disruptions to the power grid, significant disruptions to the transportation system, and the destruction of normal life will begin. We actually saw this earlier this year with air transport, and now we're seeing it with the railways. This drone war has made Russia weak. It's impossible to deploy air defense systems everywhere. There simply aren't enough of them.
Analysts insist that this innovative technology is a harbinger of the future of warfare. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian company that developed the unique software is lifting the veil of secrecy a bit on what to expect from this new military development. It turns out that a swarm of strike drones, like a living organism, analyzes what's happening in real time and makes decisions based on the situation.
The drones can decide which one will strike first and adapt to the circumstances. For example, if one of them runs out of battery power. Ukrainian forces began using this technology about a year ago to lay mines. Since then, it has been used to target Russian troops, equipment, and infrastructure.
And it must be admitted, they use it extremely effectively. In the Kremlin, just hearing the phrase drone swarm is enough to make their knees shake. Even the enemy admits that they simply have nothing to counter such advanced Ukrainian weaponry. They are truly impressive. By the way, if something goes wrong during such an autonomous operation, the system immediately hands control over to a human operator. Fortunately, another cutting-edge Ukrainian technology promises to help with this, the Kolibri 13 FR1. This is the so-called relay drone for FPV featuring autonomous navigation and resistance to electronic warfare. It's an inexpensive alternative to the Chinese DJI, which is widely used on the front lines.
At the very beginning of the Russian invasion, Russia was striking Ukraine with missiles and drones almost unopposed, while Ukraine had virtually nothing to respond with against Russian territory. But now, as they say, here we are. Now Ukraine has drones that are taking out Russian industry. Ukraine has acquired long-range missiles. But as Putin says, the special military operation is going according to plan. Apparently, this is part of the plan too.
The new domestically produced UAV is not just a drone. It's an entire system that includes 2 carrier relays, a ground control station, and additional antennas. This approach makes it possible to maintain a stable communication channel at the tactical level. The drone's design is modular, which allows for quick replacement of damaged components right on the battlefield. Among the advantages of the Ukrainian Kolibri are its resistance to strong winds and low temperatures, as well as the ability to operate both day and night.
When they are taught to interact with each other, when they are taught to guide each other to targets, or let's say to cover each other, just like we see at various Chinese shows, where drones in the sky perform all sorts of beautiful formations. It will be the same thing, only in war. That, of course, will be truly terrifying. It's completely unclear how one could fight against this if drones are taught to think, so to speak, to make decisions, especially if drones are taught to make decisions to engage targets. That would be an absolute nightmare.
So how does the Kremlin respond to all this? Instead of developing new types of air defense systems, Putin is putting all the efforts of the Russian defense industry into creating more and more methods of terror. In particular, they are actively improving their Shahed drones, training them to strike residential buildings of peaceful Ukrainians as accurately as possible. This unpleasant news for us was recently shared by a military radio technology specialist with the call sign Flash. According to him, Russian mopeds have recently become much more dangerous and deadly.
A fresh find just now. Do you see what kind of antennas are installed on the edges of the wings? Unfortunately, unlike the Guran drones, we haven't been able to find the modem and camera. They are disassembled and burn. For those who don't know, this is a new version of the Shahed drone which can be controlled online from Russia, can conduct reconnaissance, and can even attack moving targets.
However, to be fair, the Ukrainian defense industry had already started working on improving Ukraine's air defense system long before this. By staying ahead of the enemy, our engineers are already actively developing our own version of HIMARS. The foreign rocket system has proven its effectiveness on the battlefield with high accuracy and the ability to operate at long distances. This is exactly what we need. For Ukraine, having its own counterpart to American weaponry means not only reducing dependence on Allied supplies, but also the ability to adapt the system to modern warfare conditions and the specifics of combat operations. While the technical specifications of the Ukrainian system have not yet been disclosed, experts suggest that it involves a wheeled platform with high mobility, capable of launching guided missiles over distances of hundreds of kilometers. So it's high time for the occupiers to start preparing for new surprises from the Ukrainian armed forces.
Shock! Crimea will become a grave for Russia. The security service of Ukraine is clearing the peninsula of Russian air defenses. A powerful lever that will change the course of the war. Sensation! Ukraine will receive the incredible. This will close the sky. And it has begun in Russia. Putin's new army. The decree is already on the table. All the details coming up.
Strengthening security. On the eve of winter, Ukraine will receive an additional air defense system from the Nordic countries and the Baltics. This was announced by Volodymyr Zelensky. Sweden also does not rule out selling modern Gripen fighter jets to Kyiv. Back in 2023, Sweden allowed Ukrainian pilots to be trained on these multi-role fighter jets.
The Swedish Gripen is insensitive to runways, unlike its American counterpart. Moreover, the Gripen can take off and land even on highways. Moreover, it only requires a runway no longer than 400 meters for takeoff. It's also worth noting the tactical and technical characteristics of the Gripen. It can detect aerial targets at distances of up to 120 kilometers and moving ground targets at up to 70 kilometers.
However, the delivery of these aircraft directly depends on the end of the war in Ukraine, the Swedish minister stated. Meanwhile, Russia never ceases to amaze. Pro-Kremlin media have reported on plans to create so-called gamer troops in the aggressor country. According to propagandists, video game enthusiasts are supposedly able to master drone operation faster than regular recruits.
First and foremost, it's about saving money, but it's also impossible to train a professional UAV operator even in 40 hours, as was previously stipulated by the regulations of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. All the more so when it comes to training a UAV operator in just 10 hours. And it should be noted that this initiative is above all a political one. It is intended to further militarize Russian society and to demonstrate Russia's plans to continue active hostilities, not only in Ukraine, but also, accordingly, the threat of possible direct confrontations with the NATO bloc.
But can Putin even continue to wage war at all? The UK defense minister has spoken of the Kremlin dictator's critical weakness. John Healey noted that Russia's need for military assistance from North Korea and China is direct evidence of this.
This is not about requests for help, but about attempts by the Russian Federation to create a new military political bloc against NATO, to form the so-called axis of evil. At the moment, its clear configuration is visible. It is Moscow, Beijing, Tehran. But the losses of the occupying army are evidence of Putin's weakness. This amounts to up to 1 million personnel and, accordingly, the virtual destruction of the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet. According to British intelligence, the presence of the Russian Federation in the Black Sea region has dropped to a record low in the past 100 years.
But of course, Putin is not ready to admit his defeat. During a press conference following his visit to China, the dictator made a new statement regarding the conditions for ending the war against Ukraine. The Kremlin's master declared that it would be possible to agree on an acceptable option for ending the war if common sense prevails. If not, then everything will have to be resolved by military means.
This is nothing more than a bluff on the part of the Russian dictator. The point is that the Russian dictator is well aware that his so-called plan for a territorial exchange, specifically the withdrawal of Ukraine's defense forces from controlled areas of Donetsk region in exchange for the temporarily occupied territories of Kharkiv and Sumy regions will completely fail. Moreover, at this moment, there is no advance of Russian troops deeper into the Dnipropetrovsk region.
And the Kremlin dictator also stated that he is ready to meet with President Zelensky. However, according to Putin, the meeting should take place in Moscow.
There is already a response from Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In particular, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Kuleba noted that at the moment, 7 countries are ready to provide territory for a high-level meeting. This refers to a meeting between the President of Ukraine and the Russian dictator. And such proposals from the Russian Federation indicate a prolongation of the negotiation process and actual manipulation of public opinion in the West.
Meanwhile, US President Trump announced that he intends to have a phone conversation with Zelensky in the coming days. According to him, only after that will it become clear what decisions Washington will make next.
At the moment, preparatory work is underway. Specifically, measures are being taken to exert economic pressure on the Russian Federation. In particular, a decision has been made to increase tariffs on Indian goods to 50%, which accordingly serves as a clear economic and political signal to the Russian Federation regarding the Trump administration's further plans to block the economic activities of the occupying country.
But so far, the sanctions have had no impact on the decision-making of the Russian dictator. According to Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, one possible scenario for ending the war could be freezing hostilities along the front line. However, the final decision will be made by Volodymyr Zelensky.
That's all for now. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.